Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar is Introducing Course Forecast, New Insights for Strategic Course Planning. It's presented by Plaid Analytics. My name is Andrew Drinkwater. I'm co-founder and president at Plaid Analytics and an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia. Thank you for joining us today. We're now into the holiday season in higher education, and as such, it's time to talk about some predictions for 2025. It's been an interesting year in 2024. We've seen artificial intelligence and predictive modeling rise to prominence, and we believe they'll become significant of institutional planning in the year ahead in places where they aren't already. We're also seeing continued enrollment pressures that cause institutions to more closely consider curriculum streamlining. In the absence of additional revenue from governments or from students, streamlining is a way to ensure that we can still provide top quality education with scarce resources. Last but not least, government policy shifts will make predicting the future more challenging and staffing harder. It's been a strange year where layoffs have been common, in part as a result of government changes. In Canada, this means international study permits programs have changed through 2024, starting in January with a 35% year-on-year cut. The actual results have been worse at a lot of institutions. Then in September of 2024, international study permits were cut for 2025, a further 10%, and changes were made to the postgraduate work permit program, which in particular impacted college offerings. What we see ahead is continued bumpiness as a result of government policy. With a new administration entering the United States, it's unclear how their policies will interact with demographic cliffs that are already appearing in certain jurisdictions. Time will tell as to how these predictions come through. So let's get on to the idea of forecasting. I previously worked at a major research university, and one of my responsibilities was enrollment tuition forecasting. What we found is that our tools were not well suited to busy executives who wanted to know what might happen if something changed. So for example, if we grew business programs by 5%, what might that mean? I wanted to make it so that they could use their phone on the bus on the way to campus and get an answer in real time as to what may happen. We ended up building exactly that with Plaid. And we're on a mission to make enrollment planning collaborative, accurate, fast, and easy. Amusingly, you may have noticed that enrollment is spelled with 3 L's in this AI-generated image. This makes me laugh a little bit as a Canadian because in the United States, enrollment is spelled with 2 L's. But in Canada and other former British colonies, it's often spelled with 1. Because we're caught a little bit in between these two groups, as Canadians, we sometimes get confused as to which we should be using. You may notice a few other spelling mistakes on here. This is not AI image generation strength. So outside of some of the more challenging news in the sector, in terms of Plaid Forecast, the product, it's been a pretty good year. We've welcomed 5 new institutions onto Plaid Forecast. We look forward to welcoming more in the new year. We've also implemented 99 new features or fixes. And the year's not done, so we're hoping we can crack 100 still. And our users and ourselves have made dozens and dozens of scenarios, especially those focused on international enrollment. I wanted to highlight a few of the features we've launched this year that are among my favorites. Well, course forecast is a big deal, obviously. That's why you're here today. And for me, this represents an opportunity to really get into the core of what an institution does, help them better understand what may impact their teaching in the years ahead. We also launched scenario comparison, which I'll show you today. This allows you in real time to compare one scenario to another, see what the differences are, and understand the magnitude of those changes. And last but not least, there's some under the hood work that's made a real difference. We've made major gains on performance, which allows us to serve the largest institutions in North America, as well as the smallest institutions, with a wide variety of different kinds of programs, different lengths, different levels of complexity. It was important to make sure that our system could perform at top-notch speed. You'll see today that this has worked out pretty well. So why does all this stuff matter? The idea here is that Plaid Forecast enables you to create different kinds of scenarios based on what you know at the time. You see a chart here that shows a variety of different scenarios, and these were ones that came out of the international study permit changes in Canada in early 2024. These were scenarios we thought might happen. The red line, which you see is going straight up, is if compound growth was allowed to continue unabated. We could see roughly an 18% growth rate year over year relative to 2027, but that ultimately our population would roughly double over the course of the years that are shown here. You can see much more pessimistic scenarios as well. So, for example, the green one was a test scenario. We didn't know at the time what the allocations would be for Ontario, and so we took a guess. And then all the ones in between are ones that are a little bit more credible. And this is not to say that any given scenario will be perfectly true, but by modeling multiple scenarios and comparing them with each other, we can use an evidence-based process to decide what is most likely. So we're going to get into demonstrating how this tool works now. But I wanted to discuss the basics first. So the basics are the user provides a scenario definition. At the moment, this is based on intakes, but other parameters will come in the future. The system then simulates program and course enrollments. And these are done many times. Typically between 100 and 1,000 simulations are done for each combination of program, year level, residency, as well as course subject and what we call course indicator, which usually means course number. At the end of the chain, you get the results. So let's go into our live demo and see how that works. So what we can see here is the landing page for Plaid Forecast. And we're looking at scenarios here. So we can see a number of different scenarios in our development environment, including these first two that I created for the webinar today. So the Senate approved plan is what we did or what we plan to do prior to changes coming from the federal government. The Drop International 35 and 10 plan is based on the announcements that happened in January and September of this year. So as a general rule, the Senate approved plan will be higher than the Drop International plan. But this won't be true evenly throughout all of our courses and programs. It'll apply differently in different places. So let's take a look at some of these scenarios. We'll start with the Senate approved so we can see what the plans looked like previously. We can see our results load on the right-hand side. These come from our cloud data warehouse, and so they load nearly instantly. We can also see kind of in the middle of the screen here that there's been two different runs done of this scenario. One was last night and one was a few hours ago. This allows us to be able to track how particular scenarios change over time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a couple of the other features. I mentioned a few that were my favorites, so we'll start with those. I'm going to click on more results, and I'm going to scroll down and add international back. And then what I will do from here is I'm going to start by comparing a scenario. So I'll hit the compare button, and I'm going to choose another scenario, in particular the webinar scenario for Drop International 35 and 10. And then I'm going to hit set comparison. From here, we see visibly 3 lines, but there's actually 4. So the red line and the yellow line that you cannot see because it's immediately underneath the red line are what would happen in the Drop International 35 and 10, which is the red line, and the yellow line is the Senate approved for domestic. They're exactly the same thing because we made no changes in that case. For the Drop International, we dropped intakes by 35 and 10% respectively, 2024, 2025, and beyond. So what we can see is that the blue line, which is our Drop International scenario, is much lower than the orange line, which was our original plan. In the early years, they're almost the same. We can see a minor difference here of about 800 students, not insignificant. But as we get further into the future, this gets more pronounced. So if we look out to 2027, we can see about 6,700 students in our previous plan and about 4,000 now. So this is going to be a major revenue drop compared to what our plan was. This allows us to compare different scenarios. I also mentioned the idea of scenario sharing. And I can do that by clicking the share button, and I can choose to add other people like Jane Feet, and we can make Jane a reader. So she's going to consume the scenario, see what the results are, but not change it. We also have the ability to write, which allows users to change it, and to be an owner, which allows them to do anything. And so now Jane's going to be able to see the same thing that I can see in real time. This allows us to open up collaboration possibilities with our other stakeholders. Depending on the permissions we can give them, it also allows them to make changes. So if I made Jane a writer and she knew something different was going to be happening for the domestic population, she could change that and run the scenario again, and I would see the differences. Okay, so that is at a really high level the starting point. We're going to dive deeper into some of this very shortly. But I wanted to show you how to create a scenario from scratch as well. So I'm going to go back to scenarios, and I'm going to take this Drop International scenario and I'm going to clone it. And the reason for that is I want to leverage all the hard work I did to come up with those intakes already and use them in another scenario. This scenario I'm going to call Teach Out. And the idea here is, let's imagine that our enrollment has dropped enough that we've made the difficult decision to phase out a program. So I'm going to hit Create Scenario, and you'll see that pop up now. And I'm a business grad, so I'm going to decide that we're going to phase out business or commerce. And this imaginary institution at Plaid University only admits in the fall, so I'm just going to pick fall terms for now. And we can see that we admit a little under 600 domestic and a little over 100 international in the previous scenario around dropping international. But we're going to phase this program out. So I'm going to use a bulk editor and set all the intakes to 0. And then I'm going to hit save. And once those have saved, I can then compare it to a different program. So for example, if I turn off my bulk editor, we can see arts still has intakes. But if we change back to commerce, they're all set to 0. And so on for the other programs. So now I'm going to run the scenario. And I'm going to change this to 100 iterations in the interest of time for a live demo so that it'll run a little bit quicker for us. And we can see when we go back to the overview screen that it's running. I will come back to this so that we can look into the program level detail a little bit closer shortly. But in the meantime, I wanted to mention for our previous scenarios that we can also do additional analysis outside of the web interface. Perhaps our institution already owns Tableau or Power BI, or this is the area that we're expert in, and we want to use this for some more additional reporting. So what we can see on the screen here is that we can start with program enrollments. And what we see here is that arts and science, predictably enough, are going to be impacted by these changes more than other faculties. This isn't a particular surprise because they're the largest faculties, so they have the most to lose in terms of N values. It does look like science might be impacted a little bit more than arts. We can also delve into this by course subject area. So the above chart was program enrollments, students pursuing, say, a science program. But when we break this out by subject area, we can see that actually some of our more pronounced differences are going to occur in courses like nursing. This may suggest that there's a crossover effect here, as in we don't see many program changes for health sciences because lots of nurses are domestic in particular, but we do see course enrollment changes in the nursing subject area, which suggests that maybe people in science are a little bit less likely to take nursing moving forward than they were before. So we can delve into that in a little more detail as well. So here we can see the percent change between the two scenarios. So what we're showing here is the change relative to the original Senate plan. So for example, if we pick this second row here of -5%, this means students from the Faculty of Arts taking courses in the School of Business will be down 5% in 2024 relative to our original plan. But 2024 doesn't tell us the whole story. There's some bright spots in here that look promising overall. And the reason for this is that we've been growing for years. And so even if we stop intakes now, it'll take a while for that to trickle through the system. So let's see how that changes over time. We can see by 2025, we get a lot more orange on the screen. And as we get out to 2028, there's not very many bright spots other than apparently trades taking engineering courses, which is a bit curious and maybe part of the oddity of our imaginary institution. But overall, we can see that enrollments are going to be down. in every possible way in almost every combination. This is going to change how we do our planning moving forward, undoubtedly. Last but not least, we have a breakdown by course level that illustrates the difference between the two scenarios. So what we can see here, the red is essentially the delta between the two scenarios. So if we look at the right-hand side and look at the upper division, we can see that in 2024, the difference is relatively negligible. But as we get out towards 2027, we're dropping by about 1,000 FTEs. That's a big deal in terms of our tuition revenue. It's going to impact our class capacities. It's going to impact our ability to deliver classes. And so these kinds of things are really important when it comes to planning. We can also get into really specific detail. So in this tab, we look at a specific course, Organizational Behavior 400. And in this particular example, it looks like under the Senate plan, our enrollments would actually go down more than under the International Enrollment Plan, which is surprising. But keep in mind that this is a 400 level course, and it takes a while for some of the changes to trickle through the system. In any case, if the orange line trend were to come true, this might suggest that we only want to offer one section of the course per year instead of two, or perhaps offer the course only once per year instead of multiple terms per year. If we make that kind of a change to our curricular and scheduling structure, will that impact our retention rate? It might. If students realize that they can't get the courses they want, they're not going to be able to graduate. So these are going to be important considerations as institutions attempt to grapple with the idea of streamlining, especially doing it quickly. Okay, let's go back to our live example now. I'll hit refresh here, and we can see that our scenario completed a couple of minutes ago. So as a general rule, most program scenarios are completed in about 30 to 45 seconds, and it takes a little longer to finish up the courses piece. But in any case, we can see here that it was under a couple of minutes that it took to run. So now let's take a look at what changed. So I'm going to go to more results. And I'll use this as a good opportunity to point out that there's different kinds of results. We have average and median, which at a really high level like this probably are almost the same. We also have confidence intervals. So I'm going to bring that on and we'll keep the median. We can see here that the confidence intervals are really, really tight because we have a big sample size. But let's change our dimensions so that we're looking at program. And once we've done that, we will see that the first program, because it's alphabetical, is airport operations. So airport operations is a much smaller trades program, maybe 100 to 150 students in any given turn. Our confidence bands are wider for this. So for example, in 2025 fall, we're predicting about 141 students are likely to take this course. But the upper end of our predictions, 153, and the lower end is 129. So if we assumed that we had 30 students per section, when we talk about our median here, then we might need 5 sections. But it's possible that if we get the high end of our estimate, we need to add a 6th section. Or we turn away a few students, but then they're delayed in achieving their trades apprenticeship designation, which could be problematic. Okay, so let's go back to our teach out example. You remember that this particular scenario focused on phasing out a business program, which of course is unrealistic. But we wanted to show it so that when you're having more detailed conversations about teach out and phasing out programs, you get an evidence of informed answer as to how long you'll be serving those students for. So we can see here that the line is moving ever downwards, which is what you'd expect when you admit 0 students per year. All of the ones that we see here are students who are already in the system and are going to be finishing up over the next few years as we move towards about 2027. There'll be a few stragglers who took some time off, but generally speaking, in a university, we might see between 4 and 6 years for a teach out program. Last but not least, let's compare this to the scenario that it was based on. So that was the Drop International. When we do that, we can see just how stark this change will be for our institution. In the beginning years, The predictions are almost identical, but as we move further and further out, this program will phase out, and this will have impacts on individual courses that are taught. Obviously, for all the business courses, it will impact it, but it will also impact courses that business students take in other faculties. And so part of our course forecast technology is designed to help understand these kinds of phenomena. If you had Plaid Forecast, you also could have made projections like this in about a minute. So for those who aren't familiar with Plaid, we empower strategic enrollment management professionals to actively plan and better serve their diverse learners while meeting institutional goals. We've worked with a number of institutions across North America, and we're super grateful for your partnership. The key uses of course forecasting technology are things like domestic and international enrollment trends, cross-faculty dynamics, service teaching planning. If you're interested in more enrollment and course forecasting technology, we'd love it if you join us. We're on a mission to make the Enrollment Planning Cafe collaborative, accurate, fast, and easy. In closing, Plaid Forecast is a mobile-friendly enrollment forecasting platform that will save you time, increase your accuracy, and engage your stakeholders in the strategic enrollment management and planning process. Plaid also makes tools around data integration, analytics, and data governance. We'd be happy to talk to you about those if you're interested. Today, we focused on Plaid Forecast, and specifically the course forecasting component of the platform. We'll be releasing our webinar schedule for the new year very soon. You can learn more at this website. And if you're interested in a custom demo for your institution, I'd be happy to have a chat with you. You can book me at the link shown here or using the QR code. Most of our institutions begin with what's called the Strategic Enrollment Needs and Readiness Assessment. This assessment allows you to understand your current process and where tools like Plaid Forecast could help save you time, increase your accuracy, and engage your stakeholders. I'd be happy to talk to you, and I'm grateful that you spent time with us today. I'll pause here for any questions that may have arisen, but otherwise I will say thank you very much for joining us. I wish you and yours the very best for the holiday season.